Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So welcome everybody to Tuesday meditation, kind of the thick of the summer, kind of meeting all these people, especially in the mornings, walking, and say, hey, nice weather. This is the nicest time of the year. Probably the most perfect weather that you can get in Canada at this time of the year right now. Something for everybody, just right. And so I was thinking just now as we were meditating, this kind of a saying, I guess you could call it, or this refrain that the senior monk at the monastery I ordained at would sometimes say, which is that the mind is a liar. It's kind of a interesting thing to say. The mind is a liar. Mind is always lying. And so one of the interesting things was sometimes you can have these kind of interactions with people. It's like, okay, had this interaction with this one person. What's going on? And think, oh gosh, what if I said something wrong, What if that person's offended now? They're offended, they're going to be mad at me, Or, oh my gosh, there's this thing that's coming up in the future. I've got this, test, or I've got this presentation, or whatever it is, and all these 10 things could go wrong. All of them are any one of these many things can go wrong. And then, of course, there is the possibility that one of them does go wrong, who knows? But more often than not, quite often, none of those things come to pass. And the person who we thought we might have offended is not offended, or the kind of terrible thing that we were worried about with the kind of presentation happening or the test happening doesn't happen. But the interesting thing about the way that the mind works is that it's very good at covering its tracks. Kind of like these good liars or good thieves. Not to try to make the mind into be something really terrible or anything like that, but this particular aspect, good liars or good thieves, one of the things they're very good at is covering their tracks. These kind of con men or con people are very good at hiding things when they do something wrong. So I remember there was this movie I used to like when I was young. It was called Boiler Room. And at that time they didn't have internet streaming. So if you had certain numbers of movies, sometimes you just watch them over and over again. And this one I watched like a whole bunch of different times. And it was about this young guy who was in New York, and he was looking for a kind of job. He started running this casino. But eventually he kind of got this job at this stock market firm. Kind of what these stock market firms do a lot of is sell stock. And if they sell stock, they get this commission, which is called a rip. Whatever, if you sell you get like a rip of 2 cents. It means if you sell 1,000 shares, you get 2 cents for each of those shares. But at this firm this guy worked at, the rip was like $3, which is something like totally unheard of. And so there are all these guys at this firm with these like Ferraris, like beep beep, they have these like funny sounding horns, not funny, I guess cool, cool sounding horns. And all of them were super rich that worked at this firm. And what it turned out at the end of the day was that what was going on at this firm was that people were making up fake companies and then selling the stock, and the stock prices were rising because of the sales that these salesmen were doing. They were selling the stock. People were buying because they were selling it. Because they were buying it, the price went up. But there was no, there was no company. It was just made up. Somebody just bought, registered a company and put like a sign on some garage door. And so this is how they made money. But inevitably, where they made their money, they got the people to give them their money, but they couldn't sell. They couldn't allow these people to sell their stock. Because if they sold their stock, obviously, then the company doesn't get any money. So there'd be times when the stock was going up, everybody's really excited, they're making sales, and then the stock would level off when they stopped. Eventually people, I guess, realize, wait a minute, I don't know what this company's about. They get all the suckers they can or something. And then the stock price would start to fall. And when the stock price started to fall, these people would come in this movie like, we want to sell, but their job as these kind of evil stockbrokers was to make sure that the people didn't sell their stock, that they stayed in this time of panic. And then some of them were even like, it sounded like, this is a fictional movie, but in the dialogue in the fiction, it's that some of these people were even repeat customers, like they lost a whole bunch of money on some stock, and yet they still went back and bought more stocks after that, from this company that was always lying to them. And it's kind of a funny thing, because the way that the mind works when it talks about the future is often like this. In the future, this is going to happen. Either something like really great, like, oh my gosh, based on it, this is going to happen. Or it's something just totally terrible. If somebody has like a lot of self-confidence, their future always seems, okay, I can do this. If somebody has anxiety, then their future is always terrible. What's going to happen, these bad things. But the amazing thing is that a lot of the time, this future doesn't come to pass. And yet, despite all that, the next time the mind comes up with a lie and says the future is going to be like this, then people still believe it. And kind of this thought comes into the head, this is the way it's going to be. Okay, let's go with that, Buy another stock. And it's the same roller coaster ride as before. Same thing happens as before, Oh, this person wasn't mad at me. Oh, this kind of terrible thing that was supposed to happen didn't happen, or whatever it is, didn't happen. So this is one of the interesting things that we can learn when we come to practice meditation, is about the mind itself, and that the mind is not a single entity. In other words, it's not just one voice, not just one unit. So that it's not just one thing in there. It's kind of like this, there was this show, kind of on a TV show metaphors today, I guess, but there was this show called A Herman's Head when I was young. Bear with me, people probably didn't watch this. This is when I was in grade 8. But, he'd be going through his daily life, and then you get these shots in his head, and in his head were all these different actors, And then they all had their own personalities. So an actor would be like, hey, let's, they'd all, they'd be like I don't know, I can't remember all the actors in his head now. But they were meant to represent different aspects of his personality, I think. But in any way, actually the way that the mind tends to work is like this. It's not this single entity that one can just trust. It's actually more like a committee. It's more like there's a whole bunch of different people in a person's head, and not all of them are nice people. Not all of them have skillful intentions. Not all of them tell the truth. Some of them are liars. Some of them consistently lie. And some of them are like these stockbrokers, that they're very good at lying, but also very good at making people fall in love with them and care about them. So that even if they lie 1,000 times, the person forgets the last 1,000 lies and runs with the 1,001st lie. No, this one's got to be true. So the interesting thing about the way that future gets projected is that it always tends to be based on a set of circumstances that exist right now. It's kind of, okay, there's this circumstance now, that circumstance now, that circumstance now. Based on these causes that I see now, the future is going to be like this. But the really interesting thing about the way the future plays out is that it's very unpredictable. Actually, the causes that a person sees here and now may be some completely unexpected cause that comes into place that's the biggest shaper of the future. Something that a person couldn't know. Something that they couldn't see. See, I remember when I was young, I had these kind of shows like Star Trek. And, sometimes you'd see these kind of like World Fair Expo 1950s. And they'd have like the expo for the 1950s. And all the stuff that people thought was futuristic in the 1950s, a lot of it just never happened. Because the things that actually happened that changed the world, nobody could predict. Nobody really could predict, well, maybe somebody, I don't know. But I certainly never heard of anybody predicting the internet. When I was young, when I first was growing up, there was no internet at all. Everybody had like paper, and the TVs had these kind of dials. You had to kind of tune them in. And then all of a sudden, in the 90s, the U.S. military came up with this project to connect different computers. Somehow that got changed into a kind of commercial application. And then through various stock market bubbles, these fiber optic cables got, laid all over the world. And now the internet is the biggest thing running. It's the kind of backbone, not only of a lot of the way that people socialize in the generations coming up, but also almost all the kind of internet, money transactions, almost everything goes through the internet these days. And yet it was totally unpredictable. You kind of look back at the causes that were in place in the 70s or the 80s. Okay, maybe somebody, I never heard it, somebody might have predicted this computer network they're working on is going to be the next big thing. But mostly people were taking the stuff that was already there and pushing it forward. Whatever was there, the future is going to be like this, but more of it. It's going to be this way and more of it. So what this means is that the future, whatever there might be coming up, is something that's actually very hard to predict. Something that we can't know 100%. Something that's difficult to totally and fully have confidence in. Now what this means is that there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity because basically whatever terrible thing somebody thinks might happen in the future has the potential to change. And it's kind of one of the interesting things. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and in our early 30s, we both got these kind of like health problems. You're kind of going through your 20s, and you don't even use the word health problem in relation to your own body. It's just like, I've got a cold, I've got like, I pulled a muscle, but then somehow in your 30s you start getting older and there's so many, you get so many problems in your body, you just say, health problems. Look, I have health problems. That was kind of funny. But the interesting thing about some of these health problems is that we were talking, and it's like, if you come down with a health problem, then you project into your future. It's like, oh my gosh, what will my future be like with this health problem? What's going to happen with this health problem? And the interesting thing about these health problems sometimes is they just disappear. Some of them, they just kind of go away. Mysteriously they come, mysteriously they leave. And that's all there is to it. Who can say why? Also, sometimes people can be totally healthy. And mysteriously, they come down with a health problem. Actually, there was this story, you hear this often. There was a fellow I knew or didn't know him, but when I was at the first monastery I ordained at, he was kind of working his whole life. And, 65, getting ready to retire, and planning to practice the Dhamma, I think, at 65. And just as he retired, he got diagnosed with cancer. And he was dead like 1 year later, at 66. So, all his plans for what he was going to do when he retired, that was it. I spent all this time planning based on the causes that existed right now. Okay, I'm healthy now. I've got my pension now. Got my money saved up now. Things are going to go this way. Off we go. Gonna get cancer, right? Or, my life is terrible. It's never going to change. I've got this health problem. I've got these financial problems. And all of a sudden, a totally unexpected solution presents itself. So what this means is that the future is something that we truly don't know. And the voices in a person's head that tell them what the future is going to be like, that tell them this is the way you'll be in the future, this is how it's going to go down, oftentimes, not always, but often can be a liar, can be false. Now this isn't to say that we don't need to plan, right? We've got to make plans for things, and those plans are important to make, but it pulls us back to a very important principle in Buddhist practice. There's this kind of famous sutta which is called the Badeka Rata Sutta. I can't remember what Badeka means. Rata means night. It's kind of translated as auspicious night. Maybe Badeka means auspicious. But the Buddha goes through and he says, basically there's people who kind of think about the past, spend all this time thinking about the past. Like in the past I had this type of form, this type of feeling, these types of thoughts, this type of consciousness. They spend time thinking about the future. In the future I'll have this type of form, this type of thought, this type of consciousness, these various things. But there's a person who in the present, instead of going to those things, doesn't get caught in the present. And in that way, it's kind of my vague memory of the sutta, a person doesn't get caught up with their form, feeling, thoughts, all these various things. They maintain themselves basically on the present moment. And when a person maintains themselves in this way, on what's here right now, then that's how they're said to have an auspicious night. So I can't remember the actual poem. There's this kind of nice poem at the end. And the last line is, for a person who dwells kind of thus ardently by day, by night, he is said to have an auspicious night. And in the time of the Buddha, the days were counted by the moon, I think, rather than the sun. So one night meant a full 24-hour period. Like same way we say a day is a 24-hour period, then a night was a 24-hour period. So in any event, this is a kind of important teaching and important principle in Buddhism. Because I remember when I was young, just getting into Buddhism, and all the different various Buddhist teachings I encountered, I tend to try to argue with them. So one of them that I encountered was, learn to stay in the present moment. But often when I tried to argue with all these Buddhist basically all the time, whenever I tried to argue with the Buddha, I always lost. And that was why I ended up converting to Buddhism. But I remember thinking about this teaching about staying in the present moment, and I was like, well, wait a minute, this makes a lot of sense, really. I mean, how much suffering is there in doing this, right? Kind of break your world down to this movement. There's not a lot of suffering in that movement. Kind of break the world down to this second, this minute. There's not a whole lot of suffering in this minute. I mean, people's legs may be a little, numb or whatever it is. But oftentimes the type of things that cause a person to suffer is when these kind of things that happen in the moment get compounded into the future. Or things that happened in the past get compounded into the present moment and taken into the future. That's what takes a small amount of suffering in the present moment and makes it immense, makes it huge. It's one of the things anyways, Oh, wait a minute, in the past I made this mistake. In the past I had this type of, face, I had this type of job, I had this type of car, I had these friends, I had these relatives. This is how it was in the past. Thinking about these things that happened in the past, I don't have those things. They've changed. One's present moment becomes terrible. It becomes kind of a difficult present moment. And you can take things that are here in the present. Okay, well, I've got this pain in my knee. What if there's some problem with my knee? What if I'm not going to be able to walk? So actually, I remember the other day, it was kind of funny. I had this kind of operation near my knee earlier in the year. And the other day I was kind of walking in the forest, and I scratched the back of my neck, and I had this bump on the back of my neck. And I was like, oh my gosh, what if this bump's another bump like the one on my knee? It's on the back of my neck. How are they going to remove it? If they try to remove it, what if I'm not in the country? If they cut it out, I'm not in the country. Maybe they'll cut the part of my neck that's, really important. That's not a good place to have a bump. And I was like, well, wait a minute here, come on, kind of like another committee member, wait a minute, this is, I don't know if that's that kind of bump. It might just be a pimple, maybe it'll go away. Let's wait, a few days. And I still remember, feeling this kind of, oh my gosh, what if it's that bump? Anyways, a few days later it went away. I don't think I feel it here now. Yeah. So that's how it is. Kind of this small bump. There's nothing particularly much to think about in the present moment. Things are going fine. Let's worry about a bump on the neck. Nothing, particularly terrible in the present moment. Let's kind of launch back to, when we were 10. Whatever happened, right? Think about that for a while. And it's in this way that a person, through a kind of inability to stay in the present moment, can make the present moment a really difficult place, can make it a really unpleasant place. But the amazing thing is that when these things get disproven, again, there's a magic show. The thief is very good at covering his tracks. And 10 minutes later, a new line of thinking can pop up. Something new to think about. Something new to worry about. But the amazing thing about all this is that it's not really that necessary. Yeah? The mind launches out to the past. My form in the past was like this. My feeling was like this. My perceptions were like this. It launches out to the future. In the future, my form will be like this. My feeling will be like this. My perceptions like this. It launches to these things because of craving. It launches to these things because of desire and restlessness. Because in the present moment, there's often not a whole lot that's interesting going on. Right? Like right now, like sitting here, just that's it. Okay, I'm sitting here, kind of a little bit, my body feels a little bit heavy, my knees feel a little bit warm, nothing much to look at. So the mind goes looking for something, looking for the past, looking for the future. And it's kind of like these kind of little cats, these kind of cats get bored where they are, and they go off playing, looking and being curious, and then they get into trouble, running around to the past, the present. So this is one of the reasons why the Buddha says to his monks, stay in your kind of ancestral homeland. There's this kind of parable in the canon where there's this kind of hawk, it's kind of flying around, and it sees this kind of, I think it's another little bird, I can't remember the name of the bird, and it swoops down and catches the bird in its talons. And the bird says, okay, you caught me, but you wouldn't have been able to get me if I was in my ancestral homeland. I can't remember exactly, but this is vaguely what I remember. And so the hawk says, okay, well, I'll let you go where you want, but you're not going to escape from me. And so the bird goes to this kind of field where, they have the rivets and all these things are turned up. And he says, come and get me, hawk. Come and get me if you want. So the hawk kind of does this dive bomb, And you see these hawks, they fold their wings in and dive bomb. They're kind of scary, dive bomb towards this bird. And just as the hawk's about to catch the bird jumps behind the kind of cleft in the field, and the hawk smashes itself off the earth. And apparently it says smashes its breast, which probably means it suffered a not too good fate. And so, in the same way, the Buddha says, stay in your ancestral homeland. The ancestral homeland here is what they call the 4 satipatthanas. Basically, being mindful, being in the present moment, more or less, with our meditation practice. Because this is a safe place. When we're in this safe place, then the future doesn't have to come and trouble us. Then the past doesn't have to come and trouble us. It's here, in this kind of ancestral homeland, that a person can be safe. Safe from the anxiety of the future, safe from the craving that comes from things that have changed in the past, at ease. This is one of the interesting things too. When a person keeps trying to come back to the present moment, then these kind of various committee members are kind of like, they can be like these kind of peels or layers of an onion, Kind of, wait a minute, there's this one, Let me step back. There's this one. Let me step back. There's this one. Let me step back. There's this one. Let me step back. More and more towards the present moment. Because the interesting thing about this is that one steps back, steps back, steps back. It's like digging a well. You kind of dig one step back. Dig, dig, dig. And if a person keeps digging into the present moment, if a person doesn't let their mind wander to the future, doesn't let their mind wander to the past, then the day comes for them when they strike water, when they find water at the bottom of the hole. It's in this way that these kind of feelings of bliss and rapture can arise in a person's meditation. You kind of see this water at the bottom of the hole, can taste some of that water. And that's when the present moment stops being a boring place. it's when it starts to become a wonderful place. So this is why the Buddha says, there's a sutta where he says, I think my walking back and forth is divine. My sitting, my lying down is divine. And it's because when a person's mind is absorbed in the present moment, when it gives rise to feelings of bliss, then wherever a person is, that feels like a really great place to be. Okay, there's nothing that a person feels that they really need too much, except maybe more of that bliss. So I remember there was this one fellow I met at a monastery in Thailand. He was planning to be a monk there. And he said, we were talking, he's like, he didn't want to be a monk at that monastery. I think he was going to go back. And he said, I had this experience when I was in college. And, he's talking, and he said, basically, I was sitting and meditating or something like that, and I just had this overwhelming feeling of bliss. And I said, it was this kind of jhana experience. And he said, if I could just have that, then I can do, I feel like if I could just go back and have that, then I'd be good. Kind of, if somebody can just get the water from that well, then they'd be good. This kind of water is here for people to drink so long as they dig down in the present moment. So long as they don't pay attention to the various committee members who keep trying to turn their attention away from the present moment. So long as they keep peeling back the onion, then they can find what there is to be, what there is to see here in the present moment. And the present moment, rather than being a boring place that one has to run after the future or run back to the past, becomes a place where a person has everything that they need, where they don't feel like they need anything more, except maybe more of this bliss. And so it's for this reason, in part, that the Buddha says, don't run after the past. Don't chase after the future. Basically I'm paraphrasing here. Maintain yourself on the present moment. Because a person who dwells thus ardently, by day, by night, he is said to have an auspicious night. So, those are some thoughts for today, and leave that for reflection.